Hello, my name is Jenna Hicken and welcome to my presentation. Over the next 20 minutes I will be identifying who the key stakeholders are and prioritising them for the closing stages of the Stockwell Street project. I will then provide a communication strategy for these stakeholders to ensure their needs are addressed to reduce their risk on project failure. So, what is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is any internal or external body that has an interest and or influence over a project's success or failure. Firstly, it is important to identify the key stakeholders that could influence the Stockwell Street project at this fit-out stage. It is also important to recognise there have been other stakeholders throughout the various project stages and their needs and influences have changed and will continue to change until project completion. However, the focus here will be on key stakeholders for the project closeout. So, stakeholders can be divided into different categories as shown in this diagram. There are internal and external stakeholders, which can be further categorised into demand and supply, and private and public. Internal stakeholders will be stakeholders that are internal to the University of Greenwich and are directly involved with the project. External stakeholders will be individuals or groups that are outside the university that can influence the project's success and are affected by the project. Using this diagram and different categories, I have identified the key stakeholders. In the internal demand category, I have identified the following key stakeholders. The first is the client. So this is the Dean of the University of Greenwich, including the Chancellors and Heads of Staff of Service. The University lecturers and staff, existing and new students, the Students' Union, any end users of the building and the financiers of the construction project. These stakeholders are formally connected to the project and will be directly affected by its success or failure. Next we have the internal supply stakeholders. Firstly, Osborne, the main contractor for the project. Next, the fit-out contractors, the project manager for the University of Greenwich side, the design team, suppliers and manufacturers, the CDM team, and finally, subcontractors. These internal stakeholders have a direct influence of the success of the project in terms of delivering the building to the internal demand stakeholders. Next, we have the external public stakeholders. These include Greenwich Borough Council, Local Authority Building Control, the Emergency Services, the Fire Safety Officer and the Transport for London. These external public stakeholders will affect the project's success as they have an influence and interest in the project closeout stages. The final category is external private stakeholders. These stakeholders will be directly affected by the project and could also affect its success. So we have local businesses and local residents, neighbours and community groups, the general public and BREEAM. As you can see here, some key stakeholders can merge between internal supply and demand, such as facilities management, the ICT department and service delivery stakeholders such as security, cleaning, canteen services, mechanical and electrical services and so on. Now this is because they have a demand on the project to be successful, but they also provide their services to the project. Okay, so now the key stakeholders have been identified, they need to be prioritised. This is important because this will identify how much influence they have over the project and how much interest they have in the project. Once the stakeholders have been prioritised, this will determine the stakeholder communication strategy. Okay, to prioritise the stakeholders, a simple graph can be used as shown here. It measures the level of interest of a stakeholder against the stakeholder's level of influence. The four categories are monitor, show consideration, meet their needs and key player. Each category identifies the level of communication and involvement that stakeholders within each box will require. Okay. Stakeholders with low interest and low influence should be informed via general communication methods at a lower frequency level than other categories. It would be wise to try and aim to move stakeholders in the monitor category into the show consideration category. This is because if you can increase their level of interest in the project, they are more likely to have a positive impact on the project and possibly be potential supporters or goodwill ambassadors. Stakeholders in the show consideration category need more communication and involvement in the project. Their high interest level means they can be involved in low risk areas and give the project support in their own interest area. As we move up the graph, we have the meet their needs category. These stakeholders have a high level of influence on the project but a low interest. Now, this is potentially a high risk to the project's success, as their low level of interest could mean poor decisions are made that could adversely affect the project. Stakeholders in this category should be engaged and consulted within their subject areas of interest, and ideally have their level of interest increased in order to make them a key player, which is fully informed with a high level of interest in the project. Key players with a high level of interest and a high level of influence should be consulted and engaged regularly with the project. By including this group in major decisions and negotiations, the project is more likely to be a success, as their needs will be addressed and stakeholders will feel more satisfied and involved with the project. In order to prioritise the stakeholders, it is important to understand their needs, interests, influence over the project, legal issues and rights, and what their contribution is. It is important to understand what risks or opportunities they may provide at this stage in the project in order to determine the communication strategy in order to finish the project successfully. So, for the handover stage of the project, the following stakeholders have been placed into the monitor category: current students, new students, the emergency services, Transport for London, and the general public. At this stage of the project, these stakeholders have a low level of interest and a low level of influence over the project's success. Both existing and new students will not have much influence or interest, as they are, or can if necessary, use the existing facilities at Avery Hill. Now, the emergency services will eventually need to be informed about the building with security details and access points, but this is not required just yet. However, they will still need to be considered to ensure this information is passed on to them in the future. The same could be said for the Transport for London, as their interest and influence was most likely higher at the planning stages of the project. The general public also has low influence and low interest at this stage as the project nears completion. Now, the stakeholders in this category have low needs at this stage of the project. Their contribution and involvement in the project has been considered in the pre-construction phases of the project, and the majority of their needs have already been met. Although these stakeholders are considered to have low interest and low influence, it is important to ensure they are monitored and kept informed in order to reduce any associated risk. Okay, so the next category is where stakeholders should be shown consideration. These stakeholders have a high level of interest but a low level of influence. University lecturers and staff have a high interest in this project because they are the key end users of the building. Their influence is reduced as project closeout stage, as their needs and influences would have been higher at the previous stage. Their contributions and requirements needed to be dealt with in the earlier stages in order for the design of the building to be finalised. Their thoughts and opinions needed to be addressed in order for the building to be fully functional for their needs. This is similar with the student union, as they were consulted at the beginning of the process, but their interest is still high, as they will be using the building when it reaches occupation stage. Similarly, local businesses, neighbours and community groups were consulted at earlier stages in order to satisfy their needs and requirements. They still have a high interest in the project, as they are directly affected by it. This project will bring more people and more money into the area, which means local businesses and residents will be affected by the amount of end users of the building. As the building is in their local area and community, they have a right to be kept informed of progress and other information which may affect them. This is why they've been categorised as into the show consideration. The next category has a low level of interest but a high level of influence over the project. These stakeholders include Greenwich Borough Council, Building Control, the Fire Safety Officer and BREEAM. Their category is Keep Satisfied. Greenwich Borough Council will need to be kept satisfied as the building must continue to meet planning conditions imposed on the project from the outset. This will include all environmental aspects of the project and meeting the local plan. Their interest would have been higher at the planning stages of the project as they would have needed the works to meet all planning conditions. The planners would have been consulted very early on in the project in order to discuss the requirements and needs of the council. Local authority Building Control will have a high level of influence as they need to sign off the work at required stages. As the project is at the closing stages, they may still need to carry out several inspections in order to meet building regulations. However, this requirement has now been reduced because the building is nearly at practical completion. Without their approval, the project could fail because delays in putting works right could affect the programme for the fit-out contractors and therefore mean the building is not ready for occupation in September. It is also a legal requirement for Building Control to carry out site visits and sign off work at various stages. However, their personal interest in the project is low as they are local authority. Oh, pause, stop, I lost it. I thought I hadn't pressed it.